You know, every day I have but one intent when I do this show, and that is to empower you, my listening audience, with information and understanding of each other um, by way of opinion. That's why I say there's only one rule. There's no such thing as a right or wrong opinion. Sometimes you leave this show with simply an understanding of the person who called or Rip Daniels. It may not be right, it may not be wrong, but you understand me better. You know where I'm coming from. Let me just tell you, these are extraordinary times we're in. Hadn't been here in quite a while, actually. I don't think we've been here since the Vietnam era and civil rights era, when extraordinary change is happening both in this country and worldwide. And I don't know, well, there's a lot of reasons for it, but I'll get into that some other time. But I do want you to be prepared for the changes that you're making, meaning you, the electorate, the people I want to inform. An informed electorate is very necessary in our country for good government. You don't have good government where you don't have citizens who are informed enough to make the decision to elect people, to change laws, or change policy. You are not powerless because you vote. Now, that said, we have a president who's currently in office now who has challenged every moral standard, every standard of statesmanship. Even the whole concept of the appearance of impropriety has been challenged. Used to be, ladies and gentlemen, up until Donald John was elected, the appearance of impropriety, just having it look like there's something improper, was enough for the electoral indictment. In other words, you know, that doesn't look right. He may not have broke a law, but that's pretty shady. That is the appearance of impropriety. There's no way anyone can look at what is happening now with the Russian collusion and not say that the appearance of impropriety is surely evident. That said, our civil discourse has now been driven to something like a talk show like this or Russian Limbaugh or one of these guys. Donald John runs the White House like that with his edicts, with his tweets, with his... The question is that you... Well, it's not a question. The statement is that you cannot accept that this is how governments, good governments, work and flourish. It isn't, folks. This is banana republic as we've ever been in this great country. Anyone who wants to play like may like is different. Is just, look, you've got to be insane to have any concept of how government works and politics and not look at this as if somehow another Idi Amin is not sitting there in the White House. I mean, anyone who would brag on shooting someone on Fifth Avenue and still get elected, I'm going to tell you something, that's an Idi Amin thing. Or El Duce. Mussolini. So it is extraordinarily important where we are now, ladies and gentlemen, especially this year, the midterms as it's called by politicians, whereby we here in the state of Mississippi will be electing two, not one, but two senators. You only get two per state, for those who don't know your civics. It's okay. Two senators per state. And of course, the representatives are based upon your population. That's why you need to participate in the census and reapportionment, as they call it. And by the way, we're electing representatives as well. I failed to mention that. I apologize for that. In the what is the 5th district here in Stephen Palazzo's district. I failed to mention that. And you need to put that up too, Ro. So how does this work? For those of you who did not go to civics class or take government, it's as simple as this. You, the voter, you will go in with a deciding vote and you're going to determine with your one vote who's going to be elected to the Senate. Now, you've got two representing Mississippi who are running. Roger Wicker is the only incumbent who is now running. And of course, one Thad Cochran has in fact is retiring, and so therefore there's a special election coming up in November. Now, coming up on June 5th is a primary, right? These primaries are literally controlled by the parties, two parties, the Democrat and the Republican Party. Okay? They run the primaries. And what happens is right here in Mississippi, you'll determine whether you're going to vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary. You don't have to be a Democrat. You don't have to be a Republican. There's nothing you can. You don't have to be a card-carrying member of anything to walk into that polling place and say, look, I'm voting for this guy. This guy is a Democrat, so I'm voting in the Democratic primary. But once you vote in the Democratic primary, you can't walk over and vote for a Republican. It's either or. In the primary, not to be confused with the general election. That's coming up in November. So what you're deciding now is which Democrat and which Republican will face each other in November. That's all you're deciding. If in fact your guy wins in the Democratic primary, then what he's got to do then is go back to the campaign trail and campaign to defeat the Republican or independent or anyone else on the ballot in November. So you're going to vote twice, at least twice. You could vote actually 3 times if there's a runoff, but I don't want to confuse you. Let's wait until that happens and then we'll explain. So you're going to something, oh, I got to go back to the polls again? Some of you think it's such grueling. And it's, I mean, nothing can be more simple than first registering 5 questions. That's all you got to fill out, 5 questions. Then voting. What, you go there, you punch, you fill out the deal, you're gone. It's not like you're drawing blood. Jeez, really? So you've got that opportunity now. You've got the opportunity to hire your senators. And Mississippi is poised, ladies and gentlemen, to actually have 2 Democratic senators. Whether you think that's good or bad, that's up to you. But it's been quite some time. I mean, we're going back to Stennis and Eastland before there was a Democratic senator. However, Mississippi has always had conservative senators. I want to make that clear. See, that may have nothing whatsoever to do with Democrat and Republican. You realize that the conservatives in the Democratic Party bolted and became Republicans after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Actually, it started before that with Strom Thurmond. People like Ronald Reagan and so forth. Oh, the Democrats did this, or the Republicans did this. No, it was the conservatives, ladies and gentlemen, who throughout the history of this country, who have always taken that hardened stance, be it segregation, be it enslavement. All of those are conservative concepts that existed long before we even had in America. I mean, you know, and I've explained that before. So all that said, you got your vote. And what you want to do is get your guy to win. Or your guy to lose. In some cases, you'll vote against. You'll vote for the weaker Republican so that he'll face the stronger Democrat in November. That has happened. Your decision to vote is yours, however. It has nothing whatsoever to do whether it's party. It has more to do with your strategy for whether you are supporting this guy or that guy. This lady or that lady. That's it. That's what it boils down to. That's what it boils down to. So it's incumbent upon you to be a little informed, and that's where we come in. We want to inform you. We want to put the chips right out there, right where they may. But I'm going to tell you, all eyes is on Mississippi. It really is, folks, because this is an extraordinary point that we're in. With that in mind, folks, you need to know that we're at the bottom of every good list and at the top of every bad list. Healthcare affordability, we're number 50th. That's out of 50 states. That's pretty strong, pretty, I say, weak. Low infant mortality rate, 50. We're low mortality rate, 50. Obesity, we're 49th. 49th in college readiness. I mean, I can't see where we've gone over 25%. 25, let's see. I'm just trying to look for a good rate here. Economic opportunity, we're 50th. Patent creation, we're 50th. Some of this won't involve policy here in this list. Transportation, we're 47th. Internet access, we're 47th. Some of these, reason why I'm mentioning this, ladies and gentlemen, because some of this sits right in the lap of he who would be senator. And the questions that you need to ask is, what are these folks we're electing going to do about it? We know what those who are sitting in office now did about it. Well, nada, one could argue. Infrastructure, we're 49th. Of course, there's been a lot of concern about bridges here. That, too, falls in the lap of the government. Fiscal term, let's see, long-term fiscal stability, we're 46. That's a little odd, being that we've got, we're showing some, we've got this big old, this state rainy day fund. Did you know we're number 1 in gambling addiction? I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Let me make sure that. Yeah, number 1. Total score 51.84. Most gambling addict states. We're number 1. I didn't know that. And now we've got sports betting. Ooh. I guess there's a reason why we have casinos here, and I guess that's the reason also why we're the poorest state, one could argue. The least gambling addicts are in Utah. What's there anyway? All right, folks, with that in mind, now that, and of course, needless to say, we joined the group with having, see, we're in the, we have the, of course, this is on the state level. We have the lowest, one of the lowest taxes on cigarettes, highest taxes on food. We're in like the top 5, top 6 on food, and we have the poorest people. You know, if in fact the conservative concept of lowering taxes spurs growth, you would think we would have lowered the taxes on poor people, one would argue. There's no doubt that we lead the nation in when it comes to healthcare, diabetes, hypertension, blood pressure, the whole works. You know that. And then infant mortality, teen pregnancy, we're hovering right up there at the top. Well, bottom meaning that we're at the top 4 as the top states. So with that said, folks, we thought we'd go ahead and start informing you by inviting some candidates to chat. And I want to make sure you know who's going to be in both the primaries. Coming up June 5th. The Democratic primary, you've got David Baria, Howard Sherman, Omeria Scott, Jason Boren?
Jensen Boren.
Jensen Boren. All right. Jerome Garland and Victor Maurice. In the Republican primary, of course, you got Roger Wicker, the incumbent, and running against him is Richard Boyenton. There you have it. Today, however, ladies and gentlemen, we've invited two of the Democratic candidates to be the Democratic nominee. So you've got the candidates. These are the candidates. These are guys who are vying to be the Democratic nominee that will face the Republican in November. With that said, I want to go to them now, and we're going to move very quickly on this, folks. Let's see, we've got one, and we've got two. Line one, I've got Representative David Baria. Good morning, Representative. How are you?
I'm doing well, Rip. Thanks for having me on your show this morning.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you being on. Also on two, we've got Howard Sherman. Good morning, Howard. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Great. I've got both of you guys on at the same time, and you're going to get the same question. We're going to be very, very simple with these things, only because that's what we do. And I know that I have not given you any kind of ground rules in the beginning, and we wanted it that way because I felt that with what you guys are vying to do, and that is represent Mississippi, there are no rules per se. The rules now is in my view, whatever rules that have happened between candidates have resulted in our being at the bottom of every good list, at the top of every bad list, unfortunately. Neither of these individuals, ladies and gentlemen, have ever served in on a federal level. Now, Representative David Baria is in the legislature, and Howard Sherman is in business, but neither of them have actually served in the Senate or in the House of Representatives for the United States and representing Mississippi, which is equal as far as I'm concerned. So with that said, I want to start first with you, Representative David Baria. Just for a minute here, just kind of introduce yourself to my audience. just for a minute, and then we will go to you, Howard, after that.
Okay, thank you, Rip. I am David Baria. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate here in Mississippi. I live in Bay St. Louis over in Hancock County, and I grew up in Moss Point, which is in Jackson County. I lived 15 years in the city of Jackson in Hinds County. I have a law degree, and I've practiced law and have done so now for 28 years. I have 3 children, one who just graduated from college, one who is in college, and I have an adopted son, Max, who is 9 years old and in the 4th grade. I currently serve in the Mississippi House of Representatives, and I have the great privilege to have been elected by my colleagues as the minority leader in the House. So I can go on, but that's in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Appreciate it. Just about right at a minute there. All right, Howard, your turn.
My name's Howard Sherman. I likewise am running for the Mississippi's U.S. Senate seat. I have had a home here in Meridian, Mississippi with my wife, Mississippi Sheila Ward. For the last 25 years, we've come here 4 months a year, summers and holidays, and 2 years ago sold our home in Los Angeles where we had to live because Sheila worked there. We're here full time, and I am embarking on this adventure because, like you said, Rip, the state's been 50th in virtually everything that matters for years, and it's just politics unusual all over the place in Jackson and in Washington. And we have to make a choice. We step out of our comfort zone and bring somebody like myself into in the private sector who's created thousands of jobs and worked on health care, or we same old. You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing but expecting a different outcome. So that's why I jumped in.
All right, folks, get ready for this because you probably have not heard this on radio and certainly not in any debates. I'm going to start with yes or no questions, and then I'll give you an opportunity to explain. Okay? So what I simply want you to do, candidates, is simply answer first yes or no. And then I'll give each of you an opportunity to say yes or no. And then I'll come back to you and say, well, why did you say no, or why did you say yes? After your opponent has said yes or no. All right, let's start with you, Mr. Sherman. Would you support expanding Obamacare in the state of Mississippi? Yes or no?
Yes.
David, would you support expanding Obamacare in the state of Mississippi?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman, how would you support expanding Obamacare in the state of Mississippi?
To increase access to health care to everybody in the state, we have to do several things. Obviously, we need the Medicaid expansion. We need to bring as many dollars as we can into the state, but we have to drive our costs down. That's a big part of my platform. In Meridian, I'm already working on initiatives to create medical tourism that drives costs down, medical diagnostics that drives costs down. So it's a combination of attracting dollars and driving our costs down. And there's some unique ways we could do it. We do it in the private sector. We can do it in the public sector.
How would you do it, David?
Well, first of all, it's not Medicare, it's Medicaid that would have to be expanded, and we fought very hard in the Mississippi House of Representatives to do just that, but we were met with resistance from the Republican majority, and in particular our governor. What that would have done, and we could still take this option if we had new leadership, it would have insured about 300,000 Mississippians. These are the working poor who have jobs. They don't qualify currently for Medicaid, and they don't have insurance privately or provided by their employers. We expected that we could have drawn down about $12 billion from the federal government, and we could have used that money to provide a payment mechanism for all of these folks. And in so doing, we would have also created 8,000 or 9,000 high-paying health sector jobs. So that's the number one thing that we could have and should have done, and we can still do it if we change leadership. The other thing is that we should have set up some insurance exchanges so that folks who didn't qualify for expanded Medicaid would have had a good marketplace to go and get affordable insurance.
Next question to you, David. Yes or no? Do you feel that the policies of Donald Trump are good for Mississippi?
No.
You, David, do you feel that the policies of Donald Trump are good for Mississippi?
I think you.
Well, that was me who drew it.
I'm sorry. That was David. I'm sorry, Howard. The same question. Do you think that the policies of Donald John, as in Donald Trump, are good for Mississippi?
You know, to say 100%, no.
So let's start with you then, Howard. So which policies are not good for Mississippi and which policies are good for Mississippi?
Well, let's just start with the tax cut he did recently. I'm an econ major in college. Okay? Tax cuts are part of fiscal policy. You use it to help direct the economy to where you want it to go. The tax cut that he did was just like Harry Potter showing up on our front doorstep. Corporations opened the door, and there was a load of cash there. I'm not privy to the data in Washington, D.C., but if we wanted to give a tax cut, we needed to direct it. If we want to build job growth in the South, if we want to build job growth in places that are depressed, then you give tax credits for using your tax credits in there. That's an example of a bad policy.
David, same question. You said no. Which of his policies are not good for Mississippi, which are good?
Well, I can't think of a single one that's good for Mississippi. Now, if he was serious about trying to do something about our country's crumbling infrastructure and he made a proposal that was workable instead of this 80-20 proposal with locals paying 80% and the federal government paying 20%, if that was flipped around, that might be good, but that's not what he proposed. I agree with Howard on this. The tax cuts were nothing more than a payback for the Republicans' corporate benefactors. The very wealthy also got a huge permanent tax cut, whereas the middle class got a much, much smaller tax cut that goes away or expires in 7 years. If you really want to do a tax cut program right to rebuild our economy, you would put money back in the hands of middle class folks because they're going to go buy a new refrigerator, they're going to go buy a new car, maybe improve their living situation by buying a new house, and that money turns over in the environment. You can't just give these multinational corporations huge tax breaks because they just give it to their CEOs and they buy back stock and they don't ever create any new jobs. And that's what we need to do. Also, Trump's, what are these tariffs that he's talking about, which have resulted in the Chinese having a counterbalancing tariffs on things like our agricultural products would be devastating for Mississippi farmers.
With the recent shooting there in Santa Fe, there have been yet more calls now for some kind of gun control. David, would you favor, yes or no, would you favor expanded background checks for the state of Mississippi?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman, would you favor expanded background checks for the state of Mississippi?
Absolutely, yeah.
David, would you favor providing federal funds for schools to have metal detectors in schools?
Yes, but I find it very unfortunate that we have gotten to this point.
Mr. Sherman, would you favor federal money to support schools and having metal detectors?
I would.
Mr. Sherman, would you support having a federal law that allows schools to actually have armed guards inside of their school or armed teachers?
You know, my children went to a school where that was...
Well, yes or no first. Yeah,
okay,
yes or no?
I'm sorry. Wow. Partially, yes, if appropriate.
I'll give you an opportunity to explain later. What about you, David? Would you favor arming teachers in schools and guards?
Well, now that's a bit of a different question than you asked Mr. Sherman. I would be in favor of arming guards, but I'm not in favor of arming teachers.
All right, so would you explain, Mr. Sherman, your position as to how you would make the schools more safe utilizing firearms?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of having armed people at the school, but not teachers. I've never met a teacher that I would really want to have dual tasking. My kids went to a school where there was that capability on campus, and it felt very safe. I think we have to limit some of the egress and access to the campuses, and I don't mind a metal detector. I was overseas recently, and every restaurant I walked into, there was a metal detector. Until our schools, shopping malls, and churches are as safe as our airplanes, everything has to be considered.
David, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm certainly in favor of pardoning schools, whatever that means. I think it means a combination of things, which is metal detectors at entrance and exits, and having guards who are trained in the use of firearms and detection of others who may present a threat. I'm certainly in favor of enhancing background checks. I'm also in favor of other reasonable gun safety measures, such as stop the manufacture and sale of AR-15s and no more of these large capacity magazines. In other words, weapons of war should not be available to the general public. I'm not talking about confiscating anything. I want people to hear what I'm saying on this, but I don't think that we need to make those available any longer.
Mr. Sherman, how do you feel about the potential for a federal ban on bump stocks and or AR-15s, or so-called assault weapons?
Well, that's obviously a tough question because you're here in Mississippi. There's a lot of people that hold it very sacred, and my first focus would absolutely be in all the other things. Bump stocks for sure need to go. Let me put it this way: everything has to be on the table, and we have to do the easy things really quickly. And until we reach a point of safety, then that may be part of what happens. But there's so many things, low-hanging fruit, to do first to make ourselves a lot safer.
Obviously, ladies and gentlemen, there's no doubt that much of what happens in the Senate, as in government period, is controlled by money and appropriations. And we have had one of the should I say, the top appropriations star, which was Thad Cochran, who just retired. He was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee for the Senate. And that's at the top of a very, very extraordinarily large amount of money, let's put it that way, and control. Because needless to say, when you're the chair, then you determine what the agenda will be in that committee, and consequently what could end up, how Mississippi could benefit, let's put it that way, or the nation for that matter. With that said, there's been great benefits for the state of Mississippi going back to Eastland and Stennis, as you men, I'm sure, are aware. Mississippi being a very small state, but being in very powerful positions, not to mention before that Cochran, of course, that was Trent Lott. And there was some tenure there, and that's you don't just wake up one morning and get there. If either of you men are elected, you will be freshmen going into the Senate, and possibly in an environment that would, well, right now it's pretty hostile. Let's start with you first, David. So if elected, if you actually win the general election in November and you become Mississippi's next state senator, this is not a yes or no question. How would you, quote unquote, bring home the bacon? Mississippi is quite dependent upon the military. I mean, we have our fair share of bases here, and at one time we almost led the nation back during World War II. A lot of people aren't aware of the fact that we have almost 5, 6, 7 bases right here in this little small state. So what do you think, or what would you pursue if elected that would actually create jobs and have the influence of federal spending in this state if you're elected?
Yeah, this is obviously not a yes or no question, because it's going to take a second here, so bear with me, please.
Okay.
What you were alluding to earlier, Rip, is the seniority that our senators have had over the years and what they've been able to do as a result of that seniority. And one of the reasons I'm running against Roger Wicker is because he has served now for a quarter century in Washington, and he really can't point, and we can't point to anything that he's done with his time in Washington that benefits the state of Mississippi. So, and I'll also say that as a member of the Mississippi legislature, once I got elected, I rose pretty quickly into leadership. I was a leader in the Senate, and obviously I am a Democratic leader in the House. So seniority is important, but having leadership ability and the ability to stand up and articulate a position is important in those bodies that I served in Mississippi and that I'll serve in Washington. So one of the things that I'm going to do, you're right, Mississippi is the largest benefactor of federal government, large S, or money from the federal government of any state in the country. And we need it more than anybody. We're like the patient on the table that is coding, and the doctor brings out the 2 paddles and puts them on the chest and brings them back to life. That's what Mississippi needs right now. And there are 2 key decisions that we've made in the last 6 years in Mississippi that we should turn around immediately. One of those is we should immediately expand Medicaid in the state of Mississippi for all the reasons I stated earlier. And the other one was this very poor decision to give out-of-state corporations tax cuts in the tune of about $750 million. At the same time, we're not funding our public schools and we're not fixing our roads and bridges. So in Washington, I'm going to push forward a national infrastructure program, and I'm going to work hard to direct money to the state of Mississippi so that we can work on that problem right away. The other thing you can do from a Senate position in Washington is that you can direct the allocation of federal education don't need it anywhere. So those are two things that I would do immediately. And then, of course, the expansion of Medicaid helps with health care. That's a big issue in Mississippi. Probably the three biggest issues are public education, health care, and infrastructure, and I would work on those immediately.
All right, David. Mr. Sherman?
I don't know that I just heard an answer. I think what you asked was you pull Thad Cochran out of the mix, that even people of both parties appreciated the dollars that he brought, and you're going to lose access to the Appropriations Committee. And that's going to be a big hit. That's going to be a really big hit. I have friends and non-friends who are supporters of Wicker who don't like him but say, well, I don't want to lose his seniority. And I say, but what has he really done for Mississippi? And they can't point to it, but they say we don't want to lose our seniority. So seniority is a big thing. Notwithstanding the call for we need more dollars for infrastructure, if you're not sitting at the appropriations table, you may not get them. So I think your question was the what then. Well, the what then is there's two or three things you do. First of all, the answer cannot be exclusively depending upon that appropriations, because if we do and you're low man on the totem pole and we wind up with David or I and Mike Espy in there, you've got all freshman senators. So notwithstanding the jumping up and down, we're just not going to get the dollars. So what do? That's where my background comes in, where we're going to just have to augment it a lot with the private sector. And David talks about the tax cuts given to corporations. California refused to match the market for the entertainment business, and now three-quarters of the business, billions of dollars left California for Atlanta and New Orleans. We will have to attract business here. We'll have to fill in whatever hole exists by attracting businesses here that generates jobs and payroll taxes and spending in our things, in our restaurants and hotels and shopping malls. In Washington, I'm going to be a senator that is not afraid to not vote block party lines. And that's the leverage. In the private sector, you do a leverage check whenever you go into situations. So if the Democrats are trying to pass something and it's not directly impactful on Mississippi, I will not hesitate to tell the party leadership to say, y'all want my vote, I need some appropriations for infrastructure, education in Mississippi, and not be afraid to say, otherwise you don't get my vote. That's what we do in the business community. You figure out where your leverage are. I'll do everything I can leverage-wise for this state in terms of getting companies here and in Washington.
All right, folks, we have Representative David Baria, also Howard Sherman, businessman here in Mississippi. They are vying to be the next Democratic nominee for the Senate race to replace Roger Wicker. When we come back, I've done the general stuff. I'm going to focus in on families, especially hurting here in Mississippi, and more specifically African-American families. Now, of course, the rising tide raises all boats, as Reagan would say. And there's no doubt that it's not just about African-American families. However, that is a focal point. And when we come back, just to give you some heads up, we're going to ask some yes and no questions regarding what will you do when it comes down to improving the life of African-American kids, and even as it applies to law enforcement and the interaction thereof. Hang tight, folks. A different kind of debate in a different kind of way with two men who are bold enough and brave enough to come on this show and do so. We'll be back.